All right, so this year in ETA, the way that the time is going to work is that in a regular ETA week, like this next upcoming week, you will have done some pre-work on your own, some personal study. Then you're going to show up and you're going to have a large group teaching time, we should be 10 minutes into large group teaching time now, and then small group time will start at 9 till 9:40, and you're going to split off into different groups or different areas of the church for discussion time. And so from there, you're probably thinking, what makes up the basis of our group time and our discussion time? And if you flip through this book, you'll see that each week there's either 16 or 4 questions. If there are 16 questions, 4 of those are going to be bolded. The bold ones, you'll just see the little note there. It says questions in bold will be revisited during group discussion. It means if you don't do anything else, do those ones. No, I'm just joking. And so those will make up your small group time. And so everybody will have seen the same thing. The leaders aren't more in the know than you are. They're just facilitating great discussions. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The purpose of ETA is to know God and not simply know about Him. To know God and not simply know about Him. As I was explaining our discipleship process to a friend of mine, he said, yeah, but isn't your church just going to become full of people who just know stuff and don't do anything? And I said, man, I sure hope not. And there's always that danger when we learn, right? There's always that danger when we take something spiritual and we apply it academically. There's that danger that we just increase in our knowledge. And Scripture says that's dangerous. Knowledge puffs up with pride. And we don't want to be that. We also don't want to be people that dive into the Word and learn personally and then bring it here and maybe only even share it here, and it never breaks the walls or the boundaries of this gathering. We don't want that. We want it to extend well beyond. We want to learn to read the Bible, and we also want to learn to live it out in community. It is good. I think a lot of times, especially in the last 20, 30 years, we've been like, oh, your quiet time with the Lord, your quiet time with the Lord. And that's great. You should have a quiet time with the Lord. But you should also read Scripture in community and learn in community and live it out in community. One of the reasons we came up with this format is because oftentimes in the past years, if you've ever attended adult Bible study or adult Sunday school, it was like you just got talked at for 45 minutes and then you went to the Sunday service, right? And it's like we don't want that, but we also don't want just groups that sort of just eat wings and talk about the football game and then go home. We want to have community. Community's good. Wings and football is wonderful. And so is like pour over coffee, and all of that is wonderful, but we also want to take what we learn and we want to live it out in community. We want to be a community that learns together. A week in the life of ETA, it consists of, like I said, pre-work, large group teach, small group discussion. If you're also in the ladies' Bible study group, which my wife is teaching, you will probably double up on quite a few things, because she is also doing the book of John, and I apologized 100 times, but that's what we're she's doing the book of John. And so if you're also doing the book of John with her, a lot of your work is going to double up. And so if you're like, man, I just did this, like write it out again, or don't, but just pick one to do, or pick, like if your questions really double up, you can pick one. You don't have to feel like you have to cramp your hand in order to write it all out twice, but it might be good to write it all out twice too. So you're going to do pre-work. Every week we're going to rotate a little bit. Some weeks you're going to have a large group teaching time and some weeks you're not. The weeks when there's a large group teaching time, that means that you will have just read 2 chapters of the book of John and you will have worked through it. So this next week, if you go to your first page, after ETA group discussion for September 18th, then you see ETA personal study week 1, September 18th to the 25th, and it says John 1 and 2. This next week, all you're reading is John chapter 1 and chapter 2. A couple weeks ago, we said, hey, if you're thinking about doing ETA, we want you to read the book of John in the next couple weeks, just so you're familiar with where we're going. But we want you this week to read just John chapter 1 and 2. And then you'll see that there's 16 questions. Because we're reading just 2 chapters, there's 16 questions, 4 of which are going to become your group discussion. On weeks when there's not large group teaching, and we're kind of focused more on the community aspect of it, more on the small group or the relational side of it. We want you to actually read the whole book of John, which sounds counterintuitive, that now you're going to do more, but you're going to read the whole book of John and you're only going to do 4 questions, and those 4 questions are going to dive into things that are like themes, things that are like repetitive things in the book of John, and you're going to just track those things. So if you go to the last week, the very last page, you'll see an example of what that looks like. October 2nd to 9 and 9 to 16 are both weeks like that, where I won't be teaching anything, but you're going to read the whole book of John. You're going to hit some of these themes. You're going to keep track of I am statements. You're going to keep track of the feasts and the festivals, all those different things that come up over and over in the book of John. And I want to explain to you why we're sort of doing it that way. One of the reasons we're doing it that way is because we really want you to be able to look at Scripture, observe what it says, interpret what it says, and then apply what it says. And so there's a bunch of different ways that we've talked about that. If you were in ETA last year, we talked about soaps. Remember soaps? Soap, a piece of Scripture. Anybody remember that? Yes, a couple people. Perfect. Soaps stands for Scripture, means read Scripture. Observe. Just simply look at it. What does it say? What is the simple, what's going on in the text? Observe, apply, pray, and then share. So SOAPS is Scripture, observation, application, prayer, and share. And then there's other ways that we can look at it more simply. You can just say, I'm just going to observe, interpret, and apply. Or you can ask questions like, what does it say? What does it mean? What does this tell me about who God is, his nature, his character, his attributes? What does this tell me about humans? How should this truth change the way I live? So that's really, when you go through the questions, sometimes you'll be like, why is Jared asking this question? Why am I doing this? Some of them are simply like fill in the blank. There's one in this week and it says, John 1:14 says that the Word became. You're done that question. That's it. Like, it's that simple. That is just observation, okay? Observation is really, really simple. Interpretation then becomes about context. It becomes about different things. Wording, context, repetition, all that stuff works itself into interpretation and application. But those observation questions, man, those are just gold. That's like gold star for you. You just did a question in 2 seconds. And so when you go through the questions, you're going to see some and you're like, why is that there? Why is he asking me that question? And other ones, you're going to be like, why did he ask me this question? Now I have to think for 2 days. It's all across the board. Some of you are going to read these questions and you're going to be like, this is way too simple. I want to go way deeper. Doesn't Jared know that this is there or this is there? And you might even hate it. And I apologize, sort of. And others of you are going to be like, because some of you are going to want like those big, deep, theme-based, cross-reference your whole Bible kind of questions. And those are in there. Others of you are going to you're not going to like those ones, and you're going to love the Word became. You're going to love that question. And here's the thing. We want to be a community that learns together, which means that those that want to run at 100 miles an hour and 100 miles deep are going to be gracious with those that are, skimming at half an inch in both directions. And that's okay. And those skimming at half an inch in both directions are going to be gracious with those when they ask a question that's 100 miles wide and 100 miles deep. Right? We can do that. That's what we really mean when we say we want to be a community that learns together. You will find some questions ridiculously easy, and you will find some questions frustratingly hard. And we will be patient with one another. I want to start by giving a little overview of the Gospel of John before we kick in. How many of you read the Gospel of John this week? Yes. Some of you did. That's good. How many of you guys got halfway through? Yes. Okay, that counts. It's something. That's good. That's great. When we are talking about the Gospel of John, I want you to know something, and I alluded to this even in how I talked about building the questions. John's Gospel is deep enough for an elephant to swim in and shallow enough for a child not to drown. That's a quote attributed to Augustine. It's deep enough for an elephant to swim in, and it's shallow enough for a child not to drown. And one of the things that's wonderful about the Gospel of John is you can read it and you can glean a ton just by observation. Simply by observing, you can be like, I know exactly what's going on. He's not like tricky. He's not cryptic. He's not any of that. He's just very clear. It's very easy to observe what's going on in the book of John as a narrative, and even to begin to interpret what's going on, because he's very clear, and there's a purpose to his clarity. The authorship is some people want to dispute whether it was, actually the Apostle John. We are going with it was the Apostle John. I don't know anybody who can really, really defend that it wasn't. So that's the Apostle John. He's an eyewitness of Jesus. He's John, the son of Zebedee. He often refers to himself in his gospel as the disciple which Jesus loved. And sometimes I read that and I'm like, what is he like? He's putting himself up, He's like, he didn't love the rest of them, but he loved me. And you're like, but if you understand the historical context, it's like he was in the inner circle, the inner three, Peter, James, and John. He was in there, and so he's actually just reporting historical fact. And so when he talks about himself, often in the book of John, he says, the disciple that Jesus loved. That's John. The Gospel of John was written while John was in Ephesus. It wasn't written to the Ephesian church. The Apostle Paul did that. Or it wasn't written to the Jews or the Gentiles in particular, like the book of Matthew is written directly to the Jews. Well, this one is written to anyone. It's written so that whoever reads it would believe in Jesus and have life in his name. The theme verse of the book of John is John chapter 20, verse 30 to 31. It says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may have life in his name. So the purpose of the book of John is that you would believe and have life in his name. That's like if you ask John, hey John, why'd you write all this? That you would believe and have life in his name. And so in our context of study, it's the same thing. We picked the book of John because we want you to believe, whether you believe already or you're moving towards belief. We want to affirm the belief that is there so that you would have life in his name. That's why he says in John 10:10, John records Jesus saying, I came that you would have life and life abundant. And so that is the whole purpose. Some of the context behind the book of John is that it is the late to mid 80s. Some people want to say 84, some people want to say 85, somewhere in there. And you think about that. What happened in 65 AD? Anybody? Big deal happened in 65 AD. Jerusalem was sacked and the temple was destroyed. So what does that do to Judaism? Pat, did I miss it? 69, 70? Started in 65. Wasn't completely done till 70. The temple is destroyed. And so what happens is and then the Jews are dispersed. And so John is looking at his Jewish friends, his people, and he's seeing they're dispersed and they don't even know how to worship anymore because everything was around the temple. Every act of worship that they committed was in Jerusalem around the temple. And now Jerusalem is destroyed, it's taken over, and then the temple is destroyed. And so he sees them as very undone, as very sort of drifting, as not knowing exactly what following their God looks like. And so I'm going to say a little bit more about that after. But when we talk about context, I want to give you an example to kind of bring home, like, what is the big deal about context? What does Jared mean when he says context? I think we all know, but I want to give you an example. A good example of why context is important is if I told you that there was a 20-year-old running down a beach with a gun, shooting everybody, we would say that guy is a monster, right? We'd go, that guy's terrible. But if I told you that the date is June 6, 1944, and the beach is in Normandy, now that guy is a hero, right? That's context. Does that make sense? That's context. So when we talk about context, that's what we're talking about. The context of the book of John is that he's convinced that the good news of Jesus is for all people, for all time. The temple's been destroyed for nearly 20 years. The landscape and the practice of organized Jewish worship has changed and is continuing to change. Most great evangelists are great opportunists. You ever met somebody who's good at evangelism? They're great opportunists. They see an opening and they take it. And I think that's why John is called the evangelist. He's often called the evangelist. And he sees this opportunity and he takes it. He sees the collapse of the organized worship of the Jews, and it leaves him an opportunity to compel his fellow Jews to trust in Jesus, as well as removes the social barriers for Gentiles, the non-Jews, to enter into the eternal family of God. John sees his cultural moment, and he seizes it with the writing of this gospel. Over and over again, he records the words of Jesus that are calling out to the Jews, calling them away from the religious institution and towards the kingdom of heaven. The gospel, according to John, is for all people, for all time, and that purpose statement again, to everyone who would believe in his name, that he would be given the right to be called children of God. And so, when we begin the Gospel of John, as you read the Gospel of John, you probably read a lot of familiar words. One of those is the prologue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And you have this prologue. Something we need to understand, and you're going to dig into this week, is that the prologue is like a foyer, or a foyer. I don't know, two different opinions on how to say that word. A foyer for the whole book of John. You walk through that, and then from there are doors. Just like walking into a building, you can't get anywhere else without first walking into the foyer. The book of John has a prologue that acts as a foyer. The starting point from which all subsequent themes are projected. Themes like life, light, witness, testimony, glory, truth, etc. are all found in the prologue and then expound on through the narrative of the rest of the book. John thoughtfully crafts his account of his time with Jesus so that all who read it would believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and having believed, they would have life in his name. And so he sees, I say that about John kind of taking his opportunity because I think when we see it that way, the whole book begins to kind of open up to us and be like, oh yeah, this guy is an evangelist. This guy's taking an opportunity. He's seizing a moment and writing this gospel. And so, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean things for us. Still, today, it absolutely does. And I also say that about the prologue because I want you, when you read through the prologue this week, to look forward. And we're going to do that later on. We're actually going to break down the prologue, and you're going to jump into the rest of the book and see how those themes are played out. And so, I say that as just a little introduction to the book of John because there's a lot there. A little disclaimer is that there is a lot in the book of John. And I don't promise that we are going to uncover and unearth every little gem that is in there, because there are so many themes we could track, and there's so many things that Jesus is doing and John is recording, and we're not going to be able to nail them all, but I hope that in your personal study, you uncover a few for yourself, and then bring them to your group study, and then encourage each other and affirm each other with those things. Also, this book is infallible, which means it's perfect. This book I have already found spelling mistakes in. And so if you find one, just correct it and let me know. I found one yesterday when I was reading through it after printing it. On the last page, question number 2, write out John 15:11. It should be 15:1 to 11. So you can fix that one right now if you want. All right. If you find any